Hello, welcome to the second webinar in our Relationship-Based Care Practices series. I'm Tina Jimenez with the State Capacity Building Center's Infant Toddler Specialist Network. The State Capacity Building Center is a service of the Office of Child Care. The Infant Toddler Specialist Network supports systems and individuals working within states, territories, and tribes to increase the supply of high-quality infant toddler care. Before we begin today, I'd like to take a minute to invite my colleagues and co-presenters to say hello.
Welcome. I'm Julie Law, and I'm excited to talk with you today about social-emotional development.
Hi, I'm Rana Schaefer, and I'm glad to be back with you again. Welcome.
Now we invite you to get comfortable as we prepare to explore infant-toddler social and emotional development. This series was designed for professional development specialists and is intended to increase your understanding of how the PITC's relationship-based care framework, the teaching pyramid, and the third edition of the environment rating scales can work together to support and measure high-quality care for infants and toddlers. We'd like to remind you that the relationship-based care practices work together to set the stage for meaningful relationships between infants and their caregivers. Here are the goals for today's webinar. We'll explore key aspects of infant-toddler social-emotional development. We'll identify relationship-based care and pyramid strategies that can support infant-toddler social-emotional development. And we'll review select items and indicators in the ITERS-3 and FECRS-3 that can be used to support the implementation of the relationship-based care practices and the pyramid model frameworks. We recommend that you allow 1 hour to view the webinar and to complete the associated learning experiences. It's time to gather your materials. Click on the handout icon to download 2 items, the social-emotional worksheet and the PowerPoint for this session. All learning experiences will be completed using the fillable worksheet. When you click on the handout icon, you'll also see links to additional resources, which you can use to support the content in this webinar. As a reminder, you'll also see a troubleshooting document located here. If you haven't downloaded that yet, you might wish to do so. Finally, you'll need to have your ITERS-3 and/or your FECRS-3 assessment booklets available. Pause the video here to gather your materials and then resume the webinar when you're ready. Welcome back. Let's begin with a reflection to help us understand why it's important to support the social-emotional development of infants and toddlers. I'd like to invite you to close your eyes and imagine that you're an 18-month-old toddler. You're going to spend your very first day in a new child care program. Think about how you might be feeling. Now imagine that your loving family member is saying goodbye and preparing to leave you in this new place. Your special someone says goodbye and they leave. Try to experience the situation from the toddler's perspective. Look around the room. What do you notice? What feelings come up for you? What would you need to feel safe and secure? What would you wish for yourself? Continue to reflect for as long as you're comfortable, and then pause the recording and complete the reflection for slide 7 on your worksheet. Resume the webinar after completing the learning experience. Welcome back. Let's think together about your reflection. Perhaps as a toddler, you thought about what you wanted and needed from your caregiver. You may have wished for a special someone who would stay close to you throughout the day, someone who would comfort you and let you know that you were safe, someone who would reassure you that your special someone would come back. You may have wished for a special someone who would understand you, someone who would notice and respond to your attempts to communicate, someone who would accurately understand your verbal and your nonverbal cues, someone who would be available to meet both your emotional and your physical needs. During the reflection, you might have thought about the child care environment. As you looked around this room as your toddler self, we hope that you experienced a calm and peaceful environment, an environment that, with the support of your trusting caregiver, encouraged you to explore and discover. You know, as a professional development provider, you may be asked how infant toddler caregivers and family child care providers can support new children entering their program. While this requires intention and planning on the part of the child care program, for example, the program might need to think about assigning a primary caregiver and might need to work with the child's family to develop a transition plan. Still, there's nothing that matters more than an attentive, responsive caregiver. Much can be gained by ensuring that caregivers understand the child's perspective. You might use this reflection activity to help them with that. Consider sharing the things that you thought about when you reflected on the toddler's perspective and encourage caregivers to share with you. When caregivers gift children with the behaviors shown on this slide, they're supporting children's social emotional development and well-being. Let's think about the meaning of social emotional development. Have you ever wondered why you frequently see a hyphen between the words social and emotional? While distinct, these concepts are interconnected. Our emotional development, how we feel about ourselves, has a significant impact on our social development, how we feel about and interact with others. Healthy social emotional development involves the ability to experience and handle a full range of emotions, the ability to form satisfying and trusting relationships with others, and the ability to communicate and learn and face challenges. The pyramid model provides us with a very similar definition of social emotional development. What do you see here that's similar to the previous slide? And I'll give you just a moment to think about that. Did you notice the similarities around the ability to form close, secure relationships? Or the ability to experience and regulate and express emotions? The pyramid model emphasizes that these abilities and the ability to explore the environment and learn all happen within the context of family, community, and culture. Now that we've defined social emotional development, we're going to shift our focus to the developmental needs of infants and toddlers, and I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Thanks, Tina. As you know, there are important differences between infant toddler development and that of older age groups. Understanding these differences can make caring for young children easier and more enjoyable. The unique developmental needs of infants and toddlers informs the way you will interact with them, set up the environment, and plan for responsive relationship-based care. Let's take a moment to consider how infants and toddlers differ from older age groups. Pause the webinar and open your worksheet to complete the learning experience for slide 11. What sets infants and toddlers apart from other age groups? Now let's explore what sets infants and toddlers apart from older children. As you may have noted in your response, infants and toddlers follow their own interests and rhythms. We see from the very start the infants are driven to learn specific skills, like interacting with caregivers, learning language, and building physical motor control. Infants are mostly independent explorers who may join and initiate play with their peers, but they do not naturally function as a group. Infants learn in integrated and holistic ways, meaning several domains are lighting up within one experience. For instance, an infant is rolling a ball back and forth with her caregiver. The infant is babbling and the caregiver is repeating her sounds. In this simple example, the infant is exploring physical development, using her hands to roll the ball. Cognitive development, figuring out how to roll the ball. Language development, babbling with the caregiver. And social-emotional development, building a relationship with her primary caregiver. While other children also learn holistically, holistic learning is particularly robust at this age, as many things are new and infants and toddlers are taking in a lot of stimulation at once. One of the most critical areas of development during infancy is developing a sense of self. It is important to remember development in the first years of life happens at a faster pace than any other time in our life. When caregivers understand how infants and toddlers develop and learn, they can better support and plan for their interests and abilities, as well as remain flexible for changes during this rapid period of growth. Although this information may be familiar to you, you may find new insights or ways of talking about development of infants and toddlers with the caregivers you support. We know infancy spans the first 3 years of life. Toddlerhood is part of the infant life stage. The first 3 years of life can be divided into 3 distinct levels that have specific developmental needs. You will notice there is an overlap of the ages on the slide. This is intentional to take into consideration the individual variation of development. Young infants, birth to 8 months old, are focused on security and a need to establish a trusting relationship with their caregiver. They need nurturing caregivers who provide opportunity for close contact, are available, and respond promptly. Mobile infants 6 to 18 months are focused on exploration and are ready to interact with the world around them. We support mobile infants by making the environment safe and interesting, creating challenging opportunities for movement, and allowing the children to try things out on their own. Older infants, 15 to 36 months, are focused on identity and are working to understand who they are and what they can do. Caregivers support older infants by respecting their strong need to assert themselves, offering choices, supporting fantasy and creative play, and providing scaffolding during social interactions. Now let's look at some specific aspects of infant-toddler social-emotional development. Take a moment to consider these important aspects of infant-toddler social-emotional development: development of self, emotion regulation, impulse control, and empathy. Think about how you would describe these to a new teacher or caregiver. Pause the webinar to jot down 1 or 2 ideas you might share about each of these developmental constructs in your worksheet under slide 14. Resume the webinar when you are ready. One of the primary goals of a quality program for infants and toddlers is to foster social-emotional development. These 4 aspects of social-emotional health are important because they highlight ways in which infants and toddlers differ from older children. Although we will only briefly explore them here today, if you would like to deepen your understanding, please download the PITC Guide to Social-Emotional Growth and Socialization, 2nd edition, found in the handout icon. Let's explore these concepts. The initial development of self happens in relationships with adults during the first 3 years, and it profoundly affects the infant's later experiences. As the infant learns that his cry brings a response, that his smile brings a smile, he is learning that he can make things happen. On the other hand, think about what an infant may be learning if his cry or smile brings no response or a frightening response. When experiences are repeated over time, they become part of how the child perceives himself. This is true for both positive and negative experiences. Positive, secure relationships are the key to young children's healthy social-emotional development. Caring adults provide safe, stable, and predictable environments that give infants and toddlers the opportunity to explore, interact with others, and gain a sense of who they are and develop confidence in themselves as individuals. Let's turn to emotional regulation. Think about examples of babies comfort themselves during mild, distressing situations, like a parent leaving for work. Some examples you might have thought of include looking away, sucking their thumb or fingers, holding a soft toy or blanket, or moving towards a caregiver. We know right from birth, healthy infants have some initial abilities to comfort themselves. Over time, and with the support of responsive caregivers, children develop the ability to manage emotions. They begin to identify emotions and how they differ, but still need support from caregivers to deal with the more intense emotions. It is critical for caregivers to understand and provide support that is attuned and responsive to each child's emotion and emotional regulation needs. Let's look at how empathy develops for very young children. Think about what empathy looks like in an infant or toddler interaction. What are some behaviors we might see? You might have thought about when an infant observes the departure of another child's parent and may bring a comfort object to that child, or may begin to become upset or cry themselves. Empathy is the ability to share in the emotional experiences of others. Primary caregivers support the development of empathy by helping very young children identify emotions and connect them to meaningful experiences. Infants and toddlers begin to realize that other children have similar experiences as they do, and their development of empathy begins to emerge. Think for a moment how you can support caregivers in understanding the development of empathy and ways to foster it. Now let's think about how infants and toddlers build the capacity to control their impulses while interacting with peers and caregivers. Infants and toddlers tend to be impulsive. They don't yet know how to consider an action before they take it, such as reaching for a toy another child is playing with, or pushing a door closed even if someone is standing in the doorway. This impulse control is learned over time as they mature, and it comes earlier for some and later for others. Caregivers play a very important role in helping a child control their impulses by providing limits, stating and restating expectations, and helping children to manage their behavior. Caregivers may offer options for intense emotions or impulsive behavior. For example, you look very excited. I'm going to help you keep your body safe while you jump around. Or, Jesse, you look angry. I'm not going to let you push Vicente. You have some big feelings right now. I'm here to help you. Relationship-based care supports infants and toddlers in learning about their emotions and how to express them in healthy and appropriate ways. Let's take a moment to look at the connection to early brain development and impulse control. As many of you know, the brain is not fully developed at birth. Like a house, the brain is built from the ground up. The base, or cerebellum, seen in yellowish green, is responsible for regulating breathing and heart rate. This is also where all information enters through our sensory system. Infants and toddlers mainly operate within the limbic or emotional brain, seen here in red. As the young child develops in nurturing relationships, they form attachments with others, are aware of their emotions, and begin to be able to hold experiences in memory, but they cannot fully regulate emotions or impulses. Through experiences in the social world and guidance from caring adults, the child's executive function part of the brain begins to grow stronger. The executive function lives in the prefrontal cortex, shown in blue, and helps us to pay attention, wait our turn, control urges to act or react, and support us in planning our actions in the world. Through relationships, children build this part of their brain and can regulate their actions, understand what is expected of them, and work together with others. Caring, responsive relationships with adults literally help to grow the brain and a child's capacity for relating in the world and learning from their experiences. To learn more about early brain development and executive function, you can access a link to the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University in the handout icon. Wow, that was a lot of information. Please take a moment to return to the reflection for slide 14 on your worksheet. If you would like to add more thoughts regarding the 4 aspects of social-emotional development, please pause the webinar to do so and then resume.
Thank you, Julie and Tina. Now that we've identified what we mean when we talk about social emotional skills and how important they are to overall infant-toddler development and learning, let's talk about some strategies to support social emotional development. As we support infants and toddlers' development of social and emotional skills, we need to think about embedding opportunities throughout the day in all aspects of curriculum. We don't hesitate to create opportunities in our planning or in our written lesson plan if they're required, for gross and fine motor, for language, for cognitive development. But we don't always intentionally create or plan these same opportunities to develop the social and emotional skills. The way we interact with infants and toddlers profoundly shapes the sense of who they are and how they respond to events, experiences, and interactions with others. It's important for us to be aware of how we respond to an infant's needs and for us to practice intentional, responsive care in all our interactions, as these experiences are growing the brain and setting the foundation for all self-regulation skills. When we read their individual cues and signals, we show them how important and unique they are. Of course, our response needs to be sensitive and supportive, even when their behavior is not desirable to us. We want to use teachable moments to build language and to emphasize appropriate interactions. It's important that we communicate that all feelings are valid, and equally as important that we teach acceptable ways to express these feelings. The pyramid model also offers several strategies for young children. Swaddling young infants, offering comfort items, holding, rocking, and singing are all ways of helping babies develop self-regulation. Of course, we would not swaddle babies or offer comfort toys in their cribs. These strategies emphasize how important relationship-based care is in supporting the development of social and emotional skills, such as self-regulation. Offering babies ways to build their self-regulation skills takes intention, responsiveness, and consistency. Many of these strategies come naturally to caregivers, but it's vital that we, as professional development specialists, help them understand how critical these strategies are in supporting healthy social and emotional development. 0 to 3 suggests strategies for supporting toddlers in managing their strong emotions. And we know toddlers have very strong emotions. We need to teach them strategies to manage their emotions and offer opportunities for self-control through choice and consistency. We also want to use visual reminders. The key points I really want to emphasize are that we need to take advantage of life's opportunities every day to help children practice self-control, and that we need to be intentional in teaching these skills to children and to plan for opportunities for them to practice. I'm going to give you a few examples. Waiting for another child to finish at the sink to wash their hands, staying at the table for a meal rather than running around with food are opportunities that happen on a natural basis. We can also plan for turn-taking games, such as rolling a ball back and forth, which requires children to wait and control their impulses. We can offer some older toddlers an opportunity to play a game called sharing music, where each person chooses an instrument to play, and we set a timer for 1 minute. When the timer goes off, children are encouraged, and I stress encouraged, to switch instruments and set the timer again. We always want to be sure not to insist they change instruments, but use this game as children are ready to begin taking turns and sharing. Of course, some children will be hesitant to give up a desired instrument, and we need to be encouraging and understanding of this. Remember, the more opportunities we give them to participate in turn-taking and sharing, both during everyday routines and planned activities, the stronger that skill will become. We also want to ensure we give children choices, allowing them to take the lead in their own individual learning. And we need to be available to observe and recognize their successes and to support their struggles. Why is it so important that we support the social emotional development of infants and toddlers? Well, one of our ultimate goals for children is to support their development and help them succeed in school and in life, right? What are the emotional skills children will need as they move to kindergarten in a few years? Pause the webinar and turn to your worksheet to list some of your ideas about what social emotional skills are needed for school for slide 22. Then return to the webinar for some ideas from the pyramid model. So let's take a look at what the pyramid model has to say. The pyramid model includes skills such as confidence, the capacity to build relationships, persistence and communication skills, and the ability to solve problems. Were some of these skills on your list, or were there others that we haven't mentioned yet? This might be a great activity to do with the caregivers you support. Now that we've identified some of the skills needed, let's briefly turn to how we can help infants and toddlers get there. In addition to forming relationships, we also know that self-regulation and the ability to express emotion are essential skills for school success. But what can we do to ensure that these skills develop appropriately? Of all the strategies, the most important one is meaningful interactions that caregivers have with young children during everyday moments, because these provide natural opportunities to shape social emotional development. One of the strategies mentioned, and I'm sure you noticed on this previous slide, to support capacity for school success is developing emotional literacy. Let's look at what emotional literacy is. You see it defined here as the capacity to identify, understand, and express emotion in a healthy way, and as the ability to recognize, label, and understand feelings. When we think about emotional literacy, communication is key. We want to provide language, the words we use with children to label their feelings, and the words we encourage them to use. For nonverbal children, we should pay attention to the child's expression of emotion, and we can teach signs and gestures to toddlers to indicate their feelings. Emotional pictures are a great example of this. There are many examples of emotional pictures in the Pyramid Module 1. In addition to some of the strategies we've already mentioned, consider choosing books, music, finger plays with a rich vocabulary of feeling words. Use puppetry or feltboard stories that retell common social experiences and emphasize the feeling vocabulary and conflict resolution. And we can read stories about characters that children can identify with who express a range of feelings. To summarize this section on strategies, we need to remember that supporting social emotional skills requires intentional planning, as well as taking advantage of opportunities during regular daily routines. We also need to pay attention to the physical environment, which we'll be talking more about in our session on small group care, And we need to embed emotional literacy into our curriculum. As I've mentioned, for more strategies, take a look at the Pyramid Model Module 1, which you will find the link to in the handout icon, which includes many more ideas. Now I'll turn it back to Tina to share how the environment rating scales can be used to support and measure the development of social and emotional skills. Tina?
Thanks so much, Rana. So in our last webinar, we shared that you can find items and indicators within all subscales in the environment rating scales that support relationship-based care and pyramid model frameworks. Today, we're going to look at some select items and indicators that support children's social-emotional development. And we just want to remind you before we get started that the purpose of this section is to support the implementation of the relationship-based care and pyramid model framework. It's not intended to serve as a training on scoring the environment rating scales. Here's an example from the activities subscale, item 19, dramatic play. In the ITERS 3, indicator 5.1 requires that many varied, appropriate dramatic play materials are accessible to children. You'll find a similar requirement in the FECRS 3. In the FECRS 3, indicator 7.4 requires that family child care providers join in children's play in a way that engages children without taking over their play. Both assessments recognize the importance of dramatic play in supporting children's social-emotional development. But why is dramatic play so important, and what role does it play in supporting children's social-emotional development? Recall that a child's sense of self develops through relationships, early experiences, and the physical exploration of the environment. Dramatic play allows children to process and imitate their real-life experiences. For example, through dramatic play, a toddler might imitate how her mother comforts her baby brother as she comforts her baby doll. Or a toddler might cook up a pretend meal to share with her caregiver and her friends. Whatever pretend role the toddler may choose to engage in will likely be connected to her life experience and to her sense of self. Dramatic play helps toddlers process their emotions, practice empathy, and engage in social experiences within their cultural context. Item 23 in the ITERS and FECRS is promoting acceptance of diversity. Indicator 5.1 requires that at least 10 positive examples of diversity be visible to children. This indicator helps ensure that children see themselves and their families and their communities represented in this place away from home. When a child sees a photo of his family in the childcare environment, or when he hears his teacher read a book in his home language, it reinforces his sense of self and of belonging. It reinforces his sense of identity. ITERS, indicator 7.1, and FECRS, indicator 7.3, require that staff or providers recognize and support children for their own individuality. This might include singing a lullaby to an infant in his home language, or providing toddlers with dress-up props that accurately represent the work and activities that their families engage in, and then talking with individual children about their families as they engage in pretend play. When caregivers appreciate children's individuality and make a child's learning and culture visible in the environment, they're supporting the child's sense of identity and his sense of self. Here's an example of ITERS item 27, peer interaction, and FECRS item 30, interactions among children. At level 5, infant toddler staff and family child care providers are required to facilitate children's attempts to interact with each other. If you open your ITERS assessment to indicator 7.1, you'll see that staff are required to talk about children's actions, intentions, or feelings to other children. So let's think about how the pyramid model concept of emotional literacy might relate to these indicators. As Rana mentioned earlier in the webinar, caregivers support emotional literacy by helping children understand and identify and express their emotions in a healthy way, and by helping children recognize and understand the feelings of others. When caregivers help children recognize the meaning of their peers' facial expressions, body language, or tone of voice by labeling and describing the meaning of those behaviors, they're supporting the development of empathy and self-regulation. This is a direct tie to the pyramid concept of emotional literacy, which is, of course, a strategy for supporting children's social-emotional development. Here's another example of how this indicator might be expressed. Caregivers can set up activities that toddlers can do together and then stay close by to facilitate those activities. Activities such as rolling a ball back and forth or stacking cardboard blocks together introduce children to social concepts such as cooperation and turn-taking. These concepts support social development. You'll find that toddlers are very creative in finding ways to work together. Item 29 in the ITERs and Ficker's item 28 are about providing physical warmth and touch. Indicator 5.1 requires that caregivers provide children with warm physical contact. For example, a caregiver might hold a child on her lap while she reads them a book, or might return a child's hug. In relationship-based care, caregivers are encouraged to demonstrate respect for children by asking a child's permission or by giving notice before they physically touch a child. For example, if a caregiver wants to initiate a hugging a toddler, she might ask, "Can I hug you?" before she does so. Or if a caregiver might give notice to a young infant before picking him up to change his diaper by saying, "I'm going to pick you up now," and then pausing before she picks up the child. Indicator 7.2 in both assessments require staff or family childcare providers to adapt their physical touch to match a child's moods, personality, and preferences. This element of respectful care involves watching a child closely and then adapting to the child's preferences for physical touch. For example, if a child doesn't like to be hugged, he might respond to a high five. Or if a caregiver discovers that a mobile infant doesn't like to be held facing inward towards the caregiver might try holding the child so that he's facing outward, and then observe the child to see if he's comfortable with that new position. In the PITC relationship-based care framework, this approach is called watch, ask, and adapt, and it's used to get in tune with the child's preferences. You can read more about this in the PITC Guide on Social-Emotional Development, and you'll find the link for that located in the handout icon. The final example that we'll share today is ITER's item 30, guiding children's behavior. Indicator 5.5 requires that staff explain the reasons why they cannot permit specific behaviors. For example, a caregiver might say, "Please walk, I want you to be safe." Or, "It's not okay to bite, biting hurts," while she places her hand as a barrier to stop the biting and acknowledges the child's feelings. So as Julie shared with us earlier, children depend on the important adults in their life to help with their self-regulation. Both the PITC and the pyramid model emphasize the need to understand that all behavior has meaning. We hope that the examples that we've shared today help you connect how the environment rating scale can work together with the pyramid model and relationship-based care framework. Please be aware that we've only shared a few examples today. You'll find many more examples by reading the indicators in your assessment book. Let's pull all this information together so that we can complete the final learning experience. We'd like you to think about how relationship-based care supports social-emotional development. and consider 2 messages that you want caregivers to understand about social-emotional development. We also want you to reflect on how you might use the ITERS 3 or FICR 3 with caregivers to build their capacity to support children's social-emotional development. Please pause the webinar here to complete the learning experience for slide 34, and then resume the webinar when you're ready. Welcome back and congratulations! You've completed the second webinar in the Relationship-Based Care Practices series. We want to thank you for your participation in today's webinar and for the important work that you do to support our infant-toddler caregivers. We look forward to your continued participation in the webinar series, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.